Hi and welcome to Lecture 3, our first of our online lectures. I'm not sure we're going to do many of these this semester, but we're certainly doing one for this week, which is your holiday break from Monday, the Labor Day public holiday. Okay, I'm going to break this into a number of sections purely because it's easy to watch short segments, take some notes, come back and watch the rest. So you're not going to have to do this all over an hour. So this is part 1 of Lecture 3. The aims of this week in particular are to look at some of the information and some background about play and national quality frameworks. This is going to help you for your planning in terms of that section in your template for play which talks about links to the frameworks, and will help you in your understanding and evaluation of play when we get to that point later on. It's important to understand these for a number of reasons, and in part because it helps you with your planning, it helps you with working out what we need to do for children. It helps us with our assessment to understand whether what we have engaged with actually has made sense in terms of children's ongoing learning, but also because you are accredited in your centres against these standards. So we need to make sure that part of what we're doing in our work directly with children links directly to the standards. Other parts of our work will link to the standards in other ways. So we're going to have a look at those now. We're going to have some understanding about what that means in terms of learning outcomes for children, which are embedded in the national quality frameworks. We're going to explore them and understand some of those links, and we're going to consider something about communication as well. We're also going to touch on a few of the theories that we haven't touched on yet. There's a plethora of theories around, but there are some that are particularly important for you when you go out on placement. So there's our aims for the week, with the addition of the theories that I've added in just in that spiel towards working towards these particular pieces of information for you. Okay, attachment theory is one I wanted to deal with and have some discussion around, and there's some really interesting reading in SLE, and that's documented for you in your Leo site. Attachment theory, according to SLE, is the primary social bond between one individual and another. Now, infants, we believe, are born with what we call directing behaviours, and those behaviours are things such as they cry, they smile, they gurgle, and all of these elicit a response from caregivers. So what the behaviour does, it directs caregivers to the child or to an action that the child requires done for them, if that makes some sort of sense. So particular cries direct caregivers to particular activities. Children or babies will have a cry for, "I'm hungry, please feed me." They'll have a cry for, "I need changing." They'll have a cry for, "I really wouldn't mind your attention right now." They may have a cry for being overtired. Mothers in particular can pick these up really well. They seem to have that bond that makes it easier for them to understand the cries. It may be because they're around the children, the babies, more than perhaps other adults are. What the behaviours do, though, these particular directing behaviours, is they bring that caregiver closer to the infant and offers them care, it offers safety, and it offers protection. And children know that they will get that when they have that cry. Again, often directed to the primary caregiver, and from about the age of 7 to 8 months, we start to see what we call separation anxiety. And that's when the infants and babies protest when the primary caregiver leaves them. So what we're talking about here is some of those really strong bonds with significant others that babies will develop very, very early that enhances their survival possibilities. By using these directed behaviours, they are cared for and they are nurtured to allow them to be fed and changed and whatever, but that allows them to survive. Without that, they may not have those particular directing responses or responses made to them that maintains their survival. It's that, in its crudest sense, that's what we're talking about. That what happens at that point is the caregiver, that caregiver that's around the most, and the child bond, and that caregiver will do anything for that child. The person that wrote most about attachment theory is this guy, John Bowlby, who was writing predominantly in the 1950s. Bowlby believed that the child discriminates their primary caregiver from others and prefers to be in that person's presence. Some people say that that actual bond can happen in utero, that the baby will respond to that particular person's voice because they hear that. That's why you now see a lot of fathers talking to pregnant mothers' bellies, so the child starts to hear, baby starts to hear that voice, and that's a voice that they will recognise post-birth. When we're talking about children being quite strongly bonded with somebody else, and we start to talk about separation anxiety, that being left in the care of another person can be seen as a threat for the child. So when that separation occurs, that separation anxiety, about 7 to 8 months, you pass the child on to somebody else to care for them. The child may show distress at that point, but if you leave the space, in particular that caregiver leaves the space, then you start to see significant separation anxiety and lots of crying around that. Now, the person that followed up Bobby's work is Mary Ainsworth, and she suggested the quality of attachment can vary between mother and infant pairs. Now, her work occurred across cultures, whereas the work of John Bowlby didn't. He predominantly worked and focused on children in the United Kingdom. Mary was seeing different types of separation anxiety. She was seeing different types of attachment and bonding in different cultures. And what we know now of some of those cultures is that they bring their babies and children up in different ways. So you hear those statements that it takes a village to bring up a child. That's very much what happens in African communities and some of the Asian communities, where it's not necessarily a mother-father pair bringing up a child, but it may be that there's a number of women in a particular tribe in Africa who will be bringing up the children. Other women will be doing other particular chores. So it varies from culture to culture. So those bonds can vary depending on how that occurs. So if a baby sees a number of people as their primary caregiver, that separation anxiety is less likely to occur at that particular age. If they've got one caregiver, 7 to 8 months, you can almost guarantee you're going to start to see some issues about being separated. Why is that important for us to understand? In part, it's because we need to consider how we support children and families in that transition into early childhood centres. As educators, we need to have some sort of plan or process, some understanding with the families about how we're going to transition that child so that this issue of separation anxiety isn't noted or isn't noticed as strongly, and we recognise that attachment theory is real, and attachment theory will affect how the child transitions from one to the other. So we need to think about that constantly. And in Maine, it's not just around those young babies. You will see children struggle with transition at a whole variety of ages, and we need to build in something around that to support the resilience that allows separation anxiety to occur or to not be the stressful situation it currently is. I wanted to touch also on developmentally appropriate practice. Developmentally appropriate practice is an approach to teaching that's grounded on research on how children learn and how they develop, and what is known about effective early childhood education or early education. Its framework is designed to promote children's optimal learning. It's designed to promote children's optimum development, and involves teachers meeting children where they are at by stage of development, both as individuals and as part of a group. And it's about helping each child meet challenging and achievable learning goals. It is the foundation of the National American Early Childhood Council's work. Now, they do a lot of things on publications and training programs and conferences, and they accredit childcare programs based, again, in America, with a head office, I believe, in Washington, DC. The important thing about their work is it's based on 3 core principles, and that's knowing about child development and learning. And they suggest that unless you know what's best for children's learning and development, unless you know something about child development, then you're less likely to be able to provide programs that make sense to these children. It's about knowing what is individually appropriate. Now, that is about specific children's needs, and knowing that helps us teach and care for children as individuals. It's about continually observing children's play. It's about continually observing their interaction with the physical environment and with others, and it's how we learn about individual children's interests, abilities and developmental progress. So it's looking at the child holistically, but looking at children as a group, but as individuals as well, and how we're going to manage that. And it's about knowing what's culturally appropriate, that we must get to know children's families, learn about their values, their expectations, and factors which shape their lives. So background information helps to provide meaningful, relevant and respectful learning experience for each child and each family. I've chosen in particular to use the image of the child climbing a tree for a couple of reasons. And one is it's around, for me, observing children in their natural and physical environment. Children love to climb trees. It's about understanding children's interests, abilities and developmental progress. But it's about providing things that are also a challenge for children. And that's not to say I want to force every child to climb a tree, but children should be able to do that should they choose. And I think too many childcare centres and early childhood services now have taken their trees out, or if they've got them in there, tell children they can't climb them. Children, and that's based on the argument that if children fall out of a tree, they're going to break their arm and therefore have to go to hospital, and there's going to be a whole lot of issues around being sued and that. And that's actually not the case necessarily. I mean, we've all had, in every service I've ever worked in, there's been at least one child has had an accident at that point. But I think we're over-sanitising things here. I think that we need to be allowed to challenge children in ways that children want to be challenged. And children will not learn to climb a tree unless they get an opportunity to do that. And it's important in terms of skill development and strength and bodybuilding and strength development. But it's also important in problem solving, that climbing a tree helps children learn to problem solve. The arguments being children will fall out of trees, not always true. I've never had a child in any centre I've ever worked in who has fallen out of a tree and broken their arm. I have had a child trip over a block and break their arm, but not fall out of a tree. And it's about that whole thing about children, they work out how to get down. They know how to do that. It's just sometimes talking it through with them. And I made that connection there with Freeble, who we talked about in week 2, where he said to climb a tree is for a child to discover a new world. Now keep in mind, he was very much a naturalist. He was a forester by training at one given point, and had a very clear connection between education and the natural environment. So I thought it was important to link in some ways to show you how some of the core principles of particular theorists are very similar, but they have very different types of programs and different types of thinking of ways about how children learn. I'm going to finish this section with another poster I found that I just thought was kind of interesting in terms of just pushing that tree argument I have along a little bit further. Children belong in trees, and it's interesting about what they're suggesting that may foster in terms of curiosity and creative thinking and social interaction with other climbers, or not if children decide to climb on their own. Lots of things, as I said, about strength, but add coordination, confidence, self-esteem, extending attention spans. A whole lots of environmental things can actually be fostered in children learning to climb trees. And I've added that the problem-solving skills is there, which is one that I see is really important with children as well, in terms of how they actually manage to learn to get themselves in and out of particular situations. So it's something worth considering. You'll be going into centres where tree climbing is banned. You may not be able to do anything just yet, but perhaps when you're actually out and practice yourself, you may want to consider whether children should have the opportunity to climb trees. Okay, back to DAP for just a moment. DAP, from those core principles I put up, also has 12 more specific principles around child development and learning. And these recognise that children learn and develop at different rates and in different ways, and that the relationships support children's development, so that's your relationship with them, and that children need to be challenged to ensure they engage in activities which help them to follow learning and developmental sequences. And that's around the decisions they make, it's around the decisions we make, and it's how we translate what we put forward for children and where they learn. and how we can translate, and if you're working with a DAP program, how you translate that framework into some high quality experiences for children. If you look further into DAP, they've listed strategies that teachers may consider using within their practice, and it's worth having a look at the NAYEC website and having a look at those strategies they're talking about. If we want to go back to the principles for just a moment, these talk about things such as children learning in a variety of ways, that play is an important vehicle for developing self-regulation, promoting language, cognition and social competence, about children's experience being shaped by their motivation and approaches to learning, that children develop best when they have secure relationships. That goes back to attachment theory. So you can see again how some of those previous theories we've talked about start to come forward when we start to talk about some of our practices when we're working with children, and it's shown here very clearly in DAP. I'm going to leave it there for this section and then come back to it in just a moment with some more theories for you.